100 years ago, people were cooking from scratch. And then we started figuring out how to make food at scale and how to distribute it at scale. What we solved for as a country was to make food that was really cheap, really delicious, that you didn't have to cook yourself. What we didn't understand when we were building that system is that when you ultra process food, it effectively becomes fatal.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Veneri. Today I'm joined by Sam Polk, co-founder and CEO of Everytable. In this episode, we talk about increasing access to healthy food. Sam explains Everytable's variable pricing model that adjusts based on the median income in the zip codes that they serve. Plus, we discuss food as medicine, disrupting fast food, and making healthy choices the default. Let's get into it. The Fitt Insider Podcast is brought to you by Jack Taylor, our exclusive PR partner. More than just PR, they're creative storytellers and brand builders who actually understand the health and wellness industry. To learn more, head to fitt.co/JackTaylor. That's fitt.co/JackTaylor. Hi, Sam. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to chat today and learn more about Everytable. I mentioned offline, been following the business and your work for quite a while, and I think it's both an interesting and much needed approach in the broader health and nutrition and potentially food as medicine landscape. But for anyone who's not familiar, could you maybe introduce yourself and tell us about the business?
Sure. So I'm Sam Polk. I'm CEO and founder of Everytable, and we started Everytable in 2016. And the idea was generally healthy food shouldn't be a luxury product. It should be available and accessible for everyone, everywhere. And so we took a hard look at how to structure a food business such that you could make fresh, made from scratch, local ingredient meals for less than the price of fast food. And that started in 2016 with a vision of centralizing production for a region in a single kitchen. So right now we have a 40,000 square foot kitchen in Los Angeles and an 8,000 square foot kitchen in New York City. And from those two kitchens, we're doing hundreds of thousands of meals a week and selling those through a big network of mostly our own stores. So now we've got 70 different stores across Southern California and New York. We also have SmartFridges. We also have an e-commerce business where we'll deliver food to your doorstep. And then we have a very large and sort of continually growing food service business where large institutions like governments or homeless shelters or government funded nonprofits or hospitals or health plans will pay us to provide meals to the people that they care about in their organization.
Yeah, it's a really interesting business. As you even walk through it there, quite a few different facets, distribution channels, production. I'd be curious from the initial idea in 2016 until now, how has that vision kind of changed? Was it always this omni-channel, multi-location distribution, or was it, because so many times I think people come to this problem with, oh, we're going to deliver some type of meal box or ready to eat meals or at home meals. This is obviously much different than that. So how did that evolution kind of take place? And maybe what was the initial concept?
Yeah, I mean, I think the initial like we started right when a lot of these big sort of shipping food in the mail businesses were sort of reaching their sort of apex. And from the beginning, we didn't like that business. And we didn't like that business because it costs a lot to ship in the mail. You've got to keep things cold. And it's sort of gross on some level to ship fresh food overnight in the mail. And so we understood initially that a retail model has existed for a long time and for good reason. It's better and more economic to get people to come to your store where you staff it and get leverage on that particular location than it is to drive to every single potential customer's house and drop food off at their doorstep. So we knew that we were going to be centralized production and small footprint grab and go stores. We also knew there was going to be an element of delivery around that. And then things started to change. The first thing was this sort of automation where smart fridges suddenly became possible in a technology that was on the market. And a smart fridge it sounds smarter than it actually is. It basically means you swipe a credit card, it opens a fridge, and then whatever you take out, you get charged for. And it's very simple, but it just means you can have a store where you don't have to have somebody staffed to sell the food. So that was the sort of where we were pre-coronavirus, and then Corona hit, and everything got upended. Like our stores got crushed, our smart fridges got crushed. But we've always been a deeply mission-driven company, and so I don't know if you remember this, Joe, but in the beginning of coronavirus, one of the first things that happened was that Gavin Newsom came out and said, seniors are going to be stuck in their homes and they can't leave their homes. And it was like, okay, Governor Newsom, that makes sense, and it's going to be fine for the seniors in Brentwood, but seniors in Compton don't sort of order DoorDash as frequently or order Instacart as frequently, and so there was a very real price barrier for those folks to get food. And so, we sort of did a few things. We launched a helpline for people that were in need, and that sort of launching of a helpline sort of put us in the center of this sort of civic conversation that ended up with Everytable basically becoming the primary provider of emergency meals during coronavirus. And that business, we thought it was just going to fall away as the pandemic subsided, but in truth, it's just really continued and continued to grow, because it turns out that it's not just coronavirus, it's continual homeless crisis. It's a continually aging population that needs senior meals. It's this huge movement towards food as medicine. So I think that there's, a really interesting synergy between a consumer business that has meals that are vetted in the market and customers that love you, and also this institutional business where I sort of like chuckle and say, this is a hard business. Fresh food is a hard business. Fresh food is an even harder business. And fresh food at fast food prices is an even harder business. But we've got some serious tailwinds, which include the fact that everybody wants to eat more and more healthy. People want to prepare their own food. And also, the two largest industries in the entire country, which is effectively government and healthcare, are deeply incentivized to feed people healthy food to basically save themselves money, because as healthy food is the best preventative medicine there is.
Yeah, as you're talking about that and now how it has evolved to this, whether it's governments or healthcare or both, you know, initially, and this is a problem when you do have, even if it's a healthier version of fast food, or it is, you're going to deliver food to somebody's home. Well, at some point, the consumer has to make that decision to eat healthier. And sometimes people don't want to, sometimes people don't have access, sometimes they can't afford it, all these different factors. So now having these relationships with different institutions, was it always the goal to kind of bridge this gap between the consumer market and also healthcare and employer and you name it, government? Or is that solely kind of a product of, as you mentioned, the pandemic and now kind of accelerating into those areas?
Yeah, I think we always knew that healthcare could be a big potential market for us, but we expected it 10 or 15 years in the future. And so coronavirus just accelerated everything. But the thing, going back to, your comment about people choosing to eat healthy, it's like, and I'm a guy that likes burgers and fries and donuts and pizza as much as anybody else, but on some level, we don't really know how people will respond to the choice of healthy food when it is at the same price point and at the same convenience that fast food has been for so many years. And that's what we're seeing is like, when people eat fast food, there's a lot of reasons. And it is for sure that a Big Mac tastes good, but it's also because it's fast and it's quick and it's available and you're going from place to place and you want a meal. And imagine if you're in that same situation and you're seeing McDonald's selling you $9 for a burger and fries and a Coke, or Every Table selling you for $6, Jamaican jerk chicken with coconut beans and rice and plantains. It's not as easy as a choice as, we sort of assume that it is.
Yeah, I think when you get right down to it, like all of these things seem obvious, right? It's that we should be providing healthy options, that we should be making it accessible, that we should be making it affordable, that we should be incentivizing people to eat this way. But seemingly everything is set up the exact opposite of that. And when you're initially setting out, some years ago now to build this business and raising venture capital to do so, was there a hurdle in talking to potential investors or partners to say like, hey, we can solve this problem because it is capital intensive. It is going to take time. And who knows if you were going to make that jump or when you were going to make the jump to kind of like institutional or healthcare. What were those conversations like and how has it played out as like now it's growing and seems to be clicking on a couple different levels?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we had in our favor is that this is just an enormous market, right? People have seen McDonald's become a multi-hundred-billion-dollar company really in just 60 or 70 years. And they've also seen their kids not like to eat McDonald's quite as much. And, teenagers move away from it and this move towards healthy. So I think it's 100% clear that whoever can figure out healthy meals at fast food prices at scale is going to be a dominant player in the food world for a long time. I think the headwinds, to put it bluntly, was like a lot of, I might call it sort of like subtle racism that basically said, hey, I don't think people in underserved communities are going to eat healthy food. And our argument was simply all cultures have evolved over time to have cuisines that are both healthy and delicious. It's only in the last 60 years that this sort of like aberrant food system has emerged. And while we think of it as normal, it's not how people have eaten. And so, really, all we're doing is taking people back to scratch cooking like their grandmother used to make, 100 years ago. And turns out people like that kind of food.
Yeah, it is interesting. And even today this debate is happening kind of currently with it's politicized. Do are people going to eat this way? Should we pay for them to eat ultra processed food? What should we subsidize? How do we make sure it's being spent on those things? How much of a conversation, like, has it become that way internally with the company, like engaging and lobbying and trying to tackle some of these political issues, or is it more so, hey, it is what it is in terms of our mission, and it bears out whenever we go and offer this in different communities that people are happy to eat this way.
I mean, I think this might be sort of like a wonky answer to that question, but the thing to understand about why the policies are the way that they are is really that how the food world has evolved, the food system has evolved, totally makes a ton of sense. And what I mean is that 100 years ago, people were cooking from scratch. And then we started figuring out how to make food at scale and how to distribute it at scale. And what we solved for as a country was to make food that was really cheap, really delicious, that you didn't have to cook yourself, and what we didn't understand when we were building that system is that when you ultra process food, it effectively becomes fatal. But the other consequence of ultra processing food is that it becomes non perishable, which is almost by definition a better business. Like if you imagine, when you make, 100,000 Pop Tarts in a big factory, you can then send that all over the country, all over the world, and those Pop Tarts can sit on shelves for months before they go bad. And so it's great for distribution. It's great for the inventory risk of the retailer, and so, you think about like what grocery stores really look like, and they're starting to move towards more and more fresh. But really, it used to be 90% of the grocery store was this shelf stable middle. And that wasn't because that's what customers wanted as much as it was they wanted cheap and delicious and they didn't know it was terrible for them. And so every table, like, is just basically replicating what CPG companies did with shelf stable food, but doing it with fresh food. And all of the laws about what you can eat and what you can use food stamps for, on some level, they make sense, right? Like you can understand that governments are saying, oh, we would rather you spend it on groceries than, go out for a lobster dinner. It's like, okay. But that sort of binary thinking has left people in a position which says, actually, the only thing available for you if you live in Watts or you live in Compton is really this shelf stable junk food, and fresh food is not on the plan. And so the long story short for us is our job, we think, is just to keep expanding till every table becomes, synonymous with the food system itself, like a part of the food infrastructure as much as, and hopefully more than someday than a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Taco Bell, because that's when you have real scale and you give consumers a choice to say, you know, what if you use those same thinking that the fast food guys did? Let's make it delicious, let's make it affordable, let's make it convenient, but it's truly healthy. And I think it'll be a better world.
Yeah, that's the hope, and I think through this conversation, and selfishly wanted to have you on to talk about this because in so many different instances, there is a lot of kind of, hype and maybe over exaggeration focus on the delivery, right? Like getting it home or ghost kitchens or some of the things we already talked about, or branding or rebranding the fast food experience. And I think one of the things that has interested me about Everytable, it has been, I don't want to say under the radar, but also deliberate kind of in the execution of just going about it and growing the business. When you said, oh, 70 locations, that's, even as somebody who has followed it, that's more than I was aware of. How have you been able to kind of take that approach and just say, hey, we're going to go about doing what it is we're doing aligned with this mission and enlisting great partners who believe in this, and it'll kind of speak for itself?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And to be honest, it's like something, that's been on some level challenging. And what I mean is like we've been around now long enough to see the sort of like rise and in some cases fall of certain sort of business models. And so if you imagine when Freshly was out there and they were raising money and they were getting sold for $1 billion and they were doing all this volume, and we would sort of look at that and be like, well, the food isn't good, but even more than that, like this business model, it doesn't really make sense to keep shipping food in the mail, and very challenging to build strong customer relationships when you're just getting a box and getting hit by digital ads. So we don't think that makes sense, even though from a venture capital perspective, the growth rates were far higher than ours were. And sort of similarly with ghost kitchens, it's sort of like, okay, well, what problem are they really solving? It's almost like the argument of ghost kitchens was that like restaurants weren't close enough to the end consumers to get delivered, but it's like there's restaurants everywhere, so I don't really get it either, but that was sort of the sexy thing. And meanwhile, we've just been sort of working in Compton and Watts and, trying to figure out how to connect with customers and make, food that they like, but also really get good at production, because that's been the sort of most fascinating and interesting part of my job is that like, you know, running a kitchen is at scale is similar to like running a factory, and manufacturing, this is like Elon Musk stuff, is like it sounds simple but it's infinitely complex, and that means that you can optimize it, right? And so for us, that's what we sort of are trying to do is like all this stuff is going on about this sexy thing and Wonder raising 300 million to do food trucks to the home or whatever, and we're sitting here being like, if we can drive our cost of labor per meal down to 60 cents, which I think we can, then we can sell food at $4 and $5 with 60, 70% gross margins. And that's what changes things, because every year a sweet green salad gets more and more expensive. And what if every tables keeps dropping and you start to be like, like this is just cheaper and more delicious than if I was gonna cook at home, let alone go out for healthy food.
Yeah, that comparison to the factory and then looking at margins in that way of how you bring them down over time. In the food business, you know, fast food aside, it's not really thought of that way. And I don't think that it's even, I don't know, it seems like maybe it's just not, it's not interesting or difficult, maybe or sexy to your point, enough of a problem for somebody to come at it and say like, "Oh, that's what we're going to chip away at over the next decade plus." But in reality, what we're doing is we're solving how to feed people in a way that doesn't ultimately kill them, So reframing the problem that way, I think is so interesting. And that's why that when it comes to the food space specifically, aside from medically tailored meals, which maybe we could talk about, but nobody is coming and saying like we're going to completely reinvent this top to bottom and make it delicious and make it easy and make it, all these things. I don't know if I have a question there. I'm kind of talking to
Well,
myself as you're doing that.
no, I mean, it's a funny, you're sort of making me reflect on our sort of situation because one thing you're right about is like, we don't really have competitors. I mean, in the food business, everybody's a competitor. So it's not like it's a winner take all and, you're the only person who's figured out how to, shoot rockets to the moon. But in terms of like healthy food at $6 price points, like back in the early days, there was Roy Choi's local, and now there's really nothing. And so we're sort of sitting here in what I think is the most exciting business there is, but on to your point, is also like a deeply unsexy, deeply operational, deeply people centric business while all the interest is on technology and AI and we're sitting here building this thing that I think what's going to happen is I think that we're going to hit scale and people are going to wake up one day and be like, holy smokes, like this thing is a juggernaut and it's going to take decades for people to catch up.
Hey everyone, we'll get you back to the show in just a second. But first, I wanted to tell you about our exclusive PR partner, Jack Taylor. Honestly, this one's a no brainer. We've known the Jack Taylor team for years. They work with some of the most innovative health and wellness companies. We're talking Whoop, Athletic Greens, Hyperice, and many more. Jack Taylor has an extensive industry network, knows how to work with high growth companies, and really invests in building long term relationships. I know this firsthand because they're Fit Insider's PR agency, so I can confidently recommend them, and I do all the time. From startups to more established brands, they go beyond pushing product to help companies truly thrive. To learn more, head to fit.co/Jack Taylor. That's FITT.co/Jack Taylor. Now back to the show. Well, that's a great place to be to continue to progress towards that goal. The two things that maybe to tackle next, like, so price is certainly a part of that. You talk about the margins, you talk about getting it down $5, $6. Another thing that is kind of when you see, to the extent that I would assume people have seen every table. It's like this idea of the price adjusts based on the location relative to what is it, the kind of average income in the area and the zip code. How do you kind of bake that into the business model in a way that it's sustainable and predictable? And to what extent do you kind of attribute the success or impact to the ability to do so?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think there's people make a lot of assumptions when they hear that we're doing a variable pricing model. And the main assumption they make is that the higher income stores subsidize the lower income
Right.
stores. And just to be 100% clear, that is 100% false. Like our most profitable stores are Compton and Watts and South Los Angeles. And we had sort of designed the business to work that way. And what I mean is, when we were starting, Tom's Shoes was a big thing. And they had this sort of like buy one, give one model. And we looked at that and we said, we don't like that for two reasons. One is that it seems like business is very competitive. And so this idea that you also have enough money to give away a product was just not going to work in the long run economically. But two, the bigger issue was that it was clear who Tom's true customer was, which was their affluent customer. And the other group was a charity sort of group. And for us, we had sort of the opposite belief, which is that we had this belief that this sort of bifurcation that a lot of people assume between the more affluent areas of a city and the underserved parts of the neighborhood were in a lot of ways sort of culturally created. And if you think about the number of people whose belief about what Compton and Watts in South LA is like comes from movies like Training Day and Boys in the Hood, and which was, in some sense, the product of a pretty racist industry sort of portraying things in a certain way. And so Everytable said, look, we actually think there's more similarities between these communities. And we want to build a business that is inclusive of everyone and ties everyone together and respects everyone. And so, from our perspective, the way that we showed respect was making money off of them, which is to say that the customer in Compton was as important, if not more important, than the customer in Santa Monica. And they're all important. And we think that they should all be tied together. But we also wanted to make sure that, this wasn't a Banana Republic Old Navy situation or a Tom's Shoes situation, but was really like, can you treat every community with dignity and make it work for every community and make it work for our business so that we can be profitable in every community as well?
Yeah, it's really impressive and thoughtful to the earlier point that because as you're talking about it, I'm thinking about not only from a food perspective, businesses that are potentially trying to solve this problem or just that exist in general, but also when you get down to it, whether it's all the different wearable technology and apps and gyms and all these problems that we have across trying to either prevent people from getting sick or treat them once they are sick, that it's seemingly dancing around the problem of like we just need to go to the places that need it most and like solve it there and then figure it out, like actually do the work of figuring it out. And the amount of money and time and commentary and all these things that go into dancing around this problem of like, hey, let's just get there and solve it. It's refreshing to hear that you went the exact opposite way. You just said that's what we're going to do and have been working kind of reverse engineering from that place.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that. And it's true. It's like sort of like what you said. Like, if you're not solving the problems or being part of the solution of the problem for everyone, then on some sense it doesn't matter, because who wants to be, an entrepreneur that's made yet another rich person slightly more comfortable or healthy?
Yeah, well said. I think the other point beyond price that I wanted to talk about was this idea of, healthcare and institutions and government, seemingly the people who should be most invested in making sure that people not only have access to food, but healthy and local and nutritious and all these things. Unfortunately, it doesn't, for a number of reasons that we already talked about, doesn't necessarily work that way. But now as food as medicine kind of moves more into the mainstream, there seems to be a lot of momentum behind it and at least calling out for better or worse, like what the harmful effects of unhealthy food are and how that impacts all types of issues across health and productivity and society. All those things are very important. But when you talk about healthy and nutritious and well-made meals, is it to any specification that would be considered, there's the distinction like medically tailored meals and are they personalized and are they up to whatever specifications? I'm not, to be honest, not exactly familiar with what they even are. Um, is it we have to get to that place or that standard, or is it just like healthy in the direction of healthy and better for you is better maybe than designated by healthcare or whoever's making that call?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question. And the big sort of, I would say, sort of like pile of gold for this in terms of where healthcare and food meet is when the health outcomes that come from eating healthy food are so proven and verified that that food becomes just as reimbursable by insurance companies as pharmaceutical drugs. And so the way they get there is by sort of doing peer reviewed studies on certain sort of disease states and certain diets and how they match sort of over time. And so while, to your point, everybody knows that eating whole foods made from scratch, a lot of vegetables, is good for you, there are very specific diets that they have sort of analyzed and say, okay, these do sort of meet a certain criteria. So, for example, we have partnerships right now with LA Care and Anthem and big healthcare agencies through CalAIM, which is basically California's sort of first step towards food as medicine and reimbursable medicine. And so when we struck these partnerships, they came and looked at the every table menus through the lenses of particular disease states. So they'd be like, okay, if you've got a kidney disease, which is means that you need to be eating a renal diet, then you need this, this, and this, this. And they would look at every table's stuff, and it turns out a good amount of our meals are good for that condition. And they did the same thing for diabetes and same thing for congestive heart failure. Now, there are some meals that don't fit in some of those, and there are some meals that don't fit in all of them, but for the most part, like, we were pretty thrilled that our meals, just as they were considered preventative medicine. And so I think that's the exciting thing for us and sort of validated what we thought, which is like, we do limit ourselves, to certain sodium and certain calorie, but we're not sort of like driven by that sort of like micronutrient focus. We're driven by made from scratch whole foods. And if it looks like it did when it came out of the ground and it was as close to that form, then that's going to be generally healthy for you. And it turns out medicine is starting to agree, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that perspective because I was having a conversation recently about, obviously there's a lot kind of in the headlines about Ozempic and different weight loss prescriptions and access to that and who gets it and who pays for it. And the comment was, it's nutrition is very complicated. And while it is in many respects, and certainly obesity is in our understanding of it and all the biological factors, in some instances it's really not. It's not in terms of what whole foods are and what's anti-inflammatory and how it impacts people. And that's kind of what you were saying is like, yet we were already doing this and following what is intuitively and throughout history been fresh whole foods, and they meet that criteria. So maybe at times it's not a matter of overthinking it or getting down to, does it check these boxes in terms of X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, I mean, I think as somebody who has liked too many donuts through my life, like I think you're 100% right that the answer for nutrition is pretty clear. The challenge is the change in emotional state and internal motivation and how to navigate this very challenging food system in order to follow that diet that is right. And I think that's right. It's like people focus a lot on the knowledge, but what's missing is not the knowledge.
Right.
It's just even if you know what to do, you still pick up that apple fritter.
Yeah. Easier said than done a lot of the
Yeah.
time, unfortunately. Um, Maybe a couple more questions before we wrap up here. One that I did want to talk about is just when you think about the margins and the pricing and expansion, a lot of the companies that we did reference in terms of whether it was delivery or consumer or fast food, like marketing plays such a big role in this. Customer acquisition costs, churn, making sure that people stick with it and come back. How do you factor that into the equation? Do you factor that in? Is it a matter of, we need to get people in the doors, we need to get the word out, or if you build it, they will come? Like, where on that spectrum are you?
I mean, 100%. I mean, it is something that we think about a lot. And I think sometimes I think about our business and right or wrong as sort of like a sequence of steps and a sequence of stages. So, first, it was like, okay, can you get one store profitable and make that work? And then it was, can you build 50 stores? And that is a very sort of hard thing to do. But we knew that once we did that, we could have sort of more both distribution and brand awareness and visibility and access for customers. And then, both because this was what the business needed at the time and because the markets changed significantly, um, prioritizing profitability over growth, we then spent a lot of time sort of attacking our cost structure and saying, how can we do everything here more efficiently? And now we're in a place where we've built a lot of stores, we've got our cost structure into a good position. And so now the focus really is, okay, how do you drive that brand awareness and drive customers in the door? And I think there's sort of like two things that we're really focused on that front. One is just storytelling. And so starting to do a lot of content about, our customers, and, our customers are basically looking for, two things. They want to be healthy and they want to be successful in the world. And they can use every table to accomplish both of those goals. And so telling stories about our customers and how they can use us, telling stories about our food and where it comes from and how it's made, and then telling stories about the company and what the vision is and what we're sort of doing that shows people kind of the heart of who we are. And then the other big focus is community, and like every table is getting to be a bigger and bigger company, but in our bones we're an organization that, when we went into Compton for the first time, we spent 6 months meeting with, local city officials and local nonprofits and local schools, and just building, really just coming correct into a neighborhood. And that's really our ethos of, frankly, not sort of coming in with this idea that we know the answer, but coming in with this idea that we want to partner and we want to be a part of. And so, as we get bigger and bigger, our focus gets even more serious on local community building and really enmeshing ourselves into the fabric of, all of the wonderful communities that we have become a part of.
Yeah, I think that's really important and often overlooked, especially when I feel like a through line is a little bit about like the I don't want to say getting distracted, but kind of falling into an over reliance on the technology piece or the marketing piece or, what have you. But like these relationships where you go into the community, you talk to people, you understand their problems, you frankly just have an actual relationship with them. It reminds me, I kind of come to this space as having come up as, a personal trainer, a group fitness instructor, like working in gyms, working in YMCAs, working with, underserved and underprivileged youth, uh, not only through physical fitness and sports, but just in other aspects of their life. And having that relationship with them is the foundation for this type of change that ultimately we have to make that again, seemingly nobody wants to talk about that part of the equation that is so important. So again, I think as you continue to scale, it becomes more difficult, but also more important to, kind of come back to that time and time again.
Totally. 100%.
Yeah. And then wrapping up and kind of looking ahead a little bit, when you think about raising capital to build this business and thinking, hey, how do we get as big as a McDonald's or whoever these fast food players are? You name the brand, whatever you think it would map to. It seems as you're talking about it that it's, hey, we're not building this. Sure, you want it to be a successful business, but it's not like, hey, what does an exit look like? What does an outcome look like? Again, that's important, but this is much more mission driven, much more kind of impacting that change. So what does that long term vision look like? How do you think about the business structure, investors, liquidity, all those things that come with raising capital, and what does that kind of look like in your head?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would be remiss if I didn't sort of acknowledge and thank all of the different investors that have believed in us from the beginning. And that, the fun thing about every table is it's this sort of eclectic mix of, pure venture capital like Lair Hippo, which led our series or our seed round, to a ton of impact investors, a ton of sort of healthcare investors like Kaiser Permanente Ventures, and even most recently, this incredible organization called the Doman Foundation, which is basically like a 200-year-old family business that was in the healthcare space and decided that they were not doing as much good as they could providing pharmaceuticals as they could doing preventative medicine through food. And so they basically sold all of their operating businesses and created an impact fund focused on healthy food access, and came basically right to every table. And so it's, for me, it's just, and then I also forgot to mention all of the foundations and CDFIs that have put money on the philanthropic sense into this business. So it's really like, the thing that is so heartening about that is that it's really like all elements of society are coming together to try to figure out this problem almost through every table, at least for those folks. And then how we think about liquidity, like I am frankly, like I think I'm going to be doing this for the next 40 years if I'm lucky enough. And I think that's how long it's going to take. And so we very much want to go public, but going public for me is really about stepping into the capital markets and getting access to capital and getting access to acquisitions and getting access to innovative debt instruments and loans. And like, I don't know if you know some of my background, but I was a distressed trader on Wall Street. And so one of the things I'm most excited about is when we get to the big scale and we can work with those investment banks to figure out the right leverage loan structure and the right derivatives in order to make acquisitions possible. And I think that will be so fun. But we got a long way to go to earn that right to play that game.
Yeah, certainly. It's exciting to think about what that looks like. And to your point, putting all of these forces and factors and partners, aligning them in a way to like do some good and change the food system and help people get healthier. It'll be certainly exciting to watch, and appreciate you making some time to tell some of that story today for folks who want to learn more and just kind of keep up with, the growth as you continue to go. Is the website the best place? Uh, where locations are available? Obviously, we talked a lot about the LA area, but maybe where else would you point people?
Yeah, everytable.com, also our Instagram and our TikTok. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. I put a ton of stuff out on sort of what we're doing and then you can also email me. I like to sort of give out my email address. It's pretty simple. It's sam@everytable.com. And so if you have any ideas about what we could do better, just shoot me a note.
Fantastic. We'll make sure all the information is included here. Excited to share this conversation and really grateful for the time. Like I said, I've been following the business and kind of on LinkedIn and other places as well. Your thoughts. So it was great to have it here and share it with the listeners.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
One more thing before you head out. Help us spread the word. Take a minute to rate and review the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or share this episode with a friend. And if you like conversations like this, you'll love the Fit Insider newsletter. We send it every Tuesday. The link is in the description. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week.